The road stretched endlessly, winding through vast stretches of greenery. It was an unusually quiet stretch of highway, bordered by tall trees and an occasional farm in the distance. The sun was low, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. Cars sped by, their engines humming as they traveled along the deserted road, cutting through the calm of the countryside. Malik, a 16-year-old boy, walked alongside the road, his backpack slung over his shoulder. He had just finished his shift as a food delivery driver, carrying only a few dollars in his pocket, a reflection of the long hours he worked in a world that didn't often value the efforts of people like him. The long walk home from the nearest delivery drop-off wasn't something Malik minded too much. He had become accustomed to the quiet and solitude, his thoughts his only company as he walked in, the fading light. However, on this evening, his peace was shattered. As he made his way down the shoulder of the highway, he noticed a flash of red off to the side. The sound of tires screeching and the faint smell of burning rubber filled the air. Malik's heart skipped a beat as he hurried toward the source of the commotion. There, in the middle of the road, lay a car, wrecked and smoking, its front end crumpled against a tree. The driver's side door was bent out of shape, and the windshield was cracked. Malik's eyes quickly scanned the scene, and his gaze landed on a woman, collapsed on the road beside the car. She was pregnant, her face twisted in pain as she clutched her stomach, her hands trembling. Without thinking, Malik rushed forward, his mind racing. Despite the hardships of his own life, his instincts to help kicked in. He couldn't leave her there alone. He had no idea who she was or what had happened, but he knew she needed help. Malik knelt beside her, his voice filled with concern. "Hey, you okay? What happened?" The woman gasped, her breathing shallow, and managed to whisper, "The baby. I'm having contractions. Please." Without hesitation, Malik could see the urgency in her condition. This wasn't just a minor accident. She needed help now, and Malik, though just a boy himself, understood that much. He quickly checked the surroundings, but the highway was empty, and there was no one around to help. Panic briefly coursed through his body, but then he pushed it aside, his focus remaining on the woman and the baby. This was a turning point for Malik, a boy who had spent his life in a world that often ignored him, had seen his community cast aside. He didn't have the means to help her. He had nothing. But in that moment, Malik made a decision. He wouldn't leave her side. He would help her. As the minutes passed, Sophia's condition worsened. Malik's heart raced as he looked at her pale face, the strain of labor making her wince with each contraction. He had no medical experience, no idea what he was supposed to do, but the urgency of the situation was clear. The sound of her heavy breathing and the faint cries of the baby were becoming more frequent, and Malik knew waiting for help would be a luxury they didn't have. "Please, I need help. Now," Sophia whispered through clenched teeth, clutching her stomach tightly. She was clearly in pain, but the only comfort she had now was Malik's steadying presence beside her. Malik swallowed his fear, looking around for anything that could help. The highway was desolate, and the car crash had already drawn too much attention. There was no time for a hospital, no time for an ambulance. "Okay, I'm here," he said softly, trying to steady his voice. "We'll get through this. Just hang on." Sophia managed a weak smile. "I don't have much time," she panted. "You'll have to help me, okay? Please, just do what I tell you." Malik nodded, swallowing his nervousness, focusing only on her words. He could see the desperation in her eyes, and in that moment, He knew he had to do everything he could to help her. As the next contraction hit, Sophia cried out in pain. Malik quickly took off his jacket and laid it out under her, his hands shaking as he did so. He then gently helped Sophia into a position that seemed most comfortable for her. He wasn't sure if he was doing things right, but he listened to her every instruction, trying his best to follow along. It wasn't long before Sophia's cries were joined by the wailing of a newborn. The baby girl was here, but the situation was far from over. Sophia was exhausted, and Malik could see the strain in her face. His hands were trembling as he held the tiny newborn gently, wrapping the little girl in his jacket, doing his best to keep her warm. The baby's cries were sharp and clear, a relief to both of them. But just as Malik let out a breath of relief, a car slowed down in the distance. A man stepped out, eyeing the situation suspiciously. "Hey, what's going on here?" the man called, walking over. His gaze shifted between Malik and Sophia before narrowing in suspicion. "What the hell are you doing with that baby?" "I'm helping her," Malik said quickly, his voice firm despite his rising panic. "I didn't cause the crash. I found her on the side of the road. I'm trying to help her deliver." The man didn't seem convinced. You're telling me you're just helping? What kind of scam is this?" Malik took a deep breath, doing his best to remain calm despite the tension building in his chest. "I'm trying to help. She's giving birth. Look at her. I'm not the one who caused this. I'm just trying to save them both." Sophia, who had been quiet up until now, looked at the man with a weak but determined expression. "He's telling the truth," she said, her voice barely a whisper but filled with conviction. "He's the one who helped me when no one else would." The man hesitated, looking at both of them in disbelief, but then something shifted. The shock faded from his face, replaced by an almost reluctant respect. "All right, but we need to get you both help." The moment felt like a turning point. Malek, still holding the newborn baby in his arms, could sense the change. The man nodded and quickly got into his car, leaving the scene with an uneasy glance back, as though questioning what he had just witnessed. Finally, with Sophia's baby safe and her exhaustion clearly taking over, Malik could only look at the little girl in his arms. He had done it. The job wasn't finished, he wasn't done helping, but at that moment, the fear that had consumed him earlier began to fade. He had saved her life, and perhaps, just maybe, that moment was enough to change everything for him as well. As Daniel Carter rushed out of his sleek car, his heart pounding with the need to find his wife and newborn daughter, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had followed him ever since the crash. He had been in meetings all morning, unaware of the horrific incident until the police called, telling him that his wife had been involved in an accident. Now, as he stepped into the scene of the wreckage, he could barely process the sight of his wife, Sophia, lying exhausted but safe, and his baby daughter wailing in the arms of an unfamiliar boy. Malik stood there, hands trembling, but a sense of quiet pride glowing in his eyes. The baby had cried, her tiny body already fighting for life. Malik had done it. He'd kept her safe. Sophia, despite her exhaustion, looked at Malik with gratitude in her eyes, silently acknowledging everything he had done for her and her daughter. Seeing the scene before him, Daniel's instinct to protect his family kicked in, and his first words were full of confusion and concern. "What's going on? Who is this boy?" He couldn't understand why Malik was holding his daughter, his stomach tight with worry. Malik, sensing Daniel's confusion, stepped back instinctively, feeling an overwhelming need to give the family space, despite everything he had done for them. He gently handed the baby to Sophia, her cries already quieting in her mother's arms. "She's safe now, sir," Malik said softly, his voice shaking but full of genuine humility. Before Daniel could respond, one of his bodyguards, who had followed him out of the car, began to approach, eyeing Malik with suspicion. "What's this kid doing here?" the bodyguard muttered, his voice low and accusatory. He probably looted the scene, trying to take advantage of the situation. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. But before anyone could react, Sophia's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She was sitting up now, holding her daughter with shaky hands, her eyes flashing with protective fury. "That boy didn't loot anything. He saved me. He saved our baby." Her voice was firm, full of authority and gratitude. "Without him, we wouldn't be here. He risked his life for us. You have no idea what he's done." Her words stunned the bodyguard into silence, and Daniel, who had been looking at Malik with confusion, now saw the truth in Sophia's eyes. This young boy, who had nothing, had given everything to save his family. His initial skepticism and fear were replaced with something much more profound: gratitude. For a moment, there was only silence. Malik stood there, still feeling the weight of what he had done. But now, more than ever, he was beginning to understand the true impact of his actions. He hadn't just saved a baby, he had saved a family, and in turn, he had found something that had been missing from his life: purpose. Daniel took a step forward, his expression softening as he met Malik's eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. You've done more than I can ever repay." Malik, though overwhelmed by the sincerity in Daniel's voice, shook his head, unsure of how to respond. "I just did what anyone would have done," he muttered, still processing the enormity of the situation. He was just a boy, after all, someone used to getting overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten. But here he was, standing at the center of something that felt like a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone involved. Sophia, still cradling her daughter, looked at Malik with tears in her eyes. "You've given me my family back," she whispered, "and for that, you'll never be forgotten." Daniel nodded in agreement, and for the first time since the accident, he saw the truth of the situation. It wasn't about money or status. It was about the strength of a person's heart, and Malik's heart had saved them all. Grateful beyond words, Daniel stood before Malik, still trying to wrap his head around everything that had transpired. He had witnessed something extraordinary, a young boy, full of courage and compassion, risking his life for a family he didn't know. Daniel had intended to offer Malik a reward, something monetary, as a token of his appreciation. However, when Malik, with a humble smile, declined the money and said, "I only did what anyone should do," Daniel was struck by the boy's selflessness. Touched by Malik's refusal, Daniel realized that a simple cash reward wouldn't be enough. He needed to do something more meaningful, something that would set Malik up for success for the rest of his life. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities, knowing that this was an opportunity to give Malik the future he deserved. Days later, Daniel arranged to meet with Malik and his mother, bringing with him a life-changing offer. Malik, still uncertain about the impact he'd made, listened in awe as Daniel spoke. "I want to help you, Malik," Daniel said, his voice sincere. "You've done more for me and my family than I can ever repay, and I want to make sure you have a better life moving forward." He reached into his briefcase and handed Malik an envelope. "This is a scholarship to one of the best schools in the country. I want you to have the education you deserve. Malik's eyes widened, and he struggled to find the words to respond. His whole life had been spent worrying about survival, but now someone was giving him the chance to thrive. As the words sank in, Daniel continued, "And I'm also offering your mother a job. I want to hire her as my executive assistant. This will give your family a stable future." For the first time in years, Malik's heart filled with hope. His mother, standing beside him, looked overwhelmed with gratitude. She had worked so hard, often scraping by just to get by, but now, with this opportunity, their future could be brighter than ever. As the news of Malik's heroism spread, it quickly caught the attention of the media. People were captivated not only by his bravery, but by the deep racial prejudice he had faced during the ordeal. The story became a symbol of how discrimination can cloud judgment and how simple acts of kindness can break through the barriers of hatred. People began to reflect on their own biases and how they could act with more compassion in their lives. Communities rallied around the story, inspired to challenge the status quo and support those who had long been marginalized. As Malik stood in the Carter family's living room, holding the baby girl he had saved on her first birthday, he couldn't help but smile. Sophia and Daniel stood beside him, thanking him once again for saving their family. He had come a long way from the boy who had nothing but his instincts and his heart. Now, as part of the Carter family, Malik had found not only purpose, but a sense of belonging. He had overcome the struggles of his past and found the opportunity to shape his own future. The world that once seemed indifferent to him was now opening up in ways he had never dreamed of. In that moment, surrounded by love and warmth, Malik knew that his life had been forever changed. He was no longer just a boy from the streets. He was a young man with a bright future, and the family he had saved now considered him a son. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time he was ready to face it, strong, supported, and full of hope. Malik's eyes widened, and he struggled to find the words to respond. His whole life had been spent worrying about survival, but now someone was giving him the chance to thrive. As the words sank in, Daniel continued, "And I'm also offering your mother a job. I want to hire her as my executive assistant. This will give your family a stable future." For the first time in years, Malik's heart filled with hope. His mother, standing beside him, looked overwhelmed with gratitude. She had worked so hard, often scraping by just to get by, but now, with this opportunity, their future could be brighter than ever. As the news of Malik's heroism spread, it quickly caught the attention of the media. People were captivated not only by his bravery, but by the deep racial prejudice he had faced during the ordeal. The story became a symbol of how discrimination can cloud judgment and how simple acts of kindness can break through the barriers of hatred. People began to reflect on their own biases and how they could act with more compassion in their lives. Communities rallied around the story, inspired to challenge the status quo and support those who had long been marginalized. As Malik stood in the Carter family's living room, holding the baby girl he had saved on her first birthday, he couldn't help but smile. Sophia and Daniel stood beside him, thanking him once again for saving their family. He had come a long way from the boy who had nothing but his instincts and his heart. Now, as part of the Carter family, Malik had found not only purpose, but a sense of belonging. He had overcome the struggles of his past and found the opportunity to shape his own future. The world that once seemed indifferent to him was now opening up in ways he had never dreamed of. In that moment, surrounded by love and warmth, Malik knew that his life had been forever changed. He was no longer just a boy from the streets. He was a young man with a bright future, and the family he had saved now considered him a son. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time he was ready to face it, strong, supported, and full of hope.